Well, hello there friends! So you now have someone in your group who is into 3D printing and you're wondering, geez, what should I get this person? In this video, I'm going to go over some of the things that not only I, but my partner has found very useful for the 3D printing scene. These are all items that I purchased out of my own money. None of the items that I'm going to list are sponsored, and all of them are going to be linked down below in the description. Some of these are going to be company specific. For example, there is a bamboo plate that I'm going to recommend, but you can go ahead and skip it if it doesn't apply to you. Now, all items that I have here are not going to break the bank. They are going to be relatively simple items, definitely under 50 bucks. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we have. So the first thing that I would recommend, and this one my partner found very useful, is a deburring tool. You can find these things on Amazon for relatively cheap, and I actually recommend that you also get quite a few of these tips. You can use this tool to remove rafts and brims and even some support material that can be very tricky to get to. And it also works on metal, so if you do any CNC machining, you can use this to clear out the aluminum chip. But for 3D printing, this is very useful for removing brims. So I highly recommend getting a few of these and keeping them in stock. Now, number two is going to be this pick set. It doesn't actually have to be this brand. I just happened to find this in Home Depot for, I think it was about $12. But it has a series of picks that you can use to get into those tricky spots. For example, this one is an L pick here. We also have a hook pick here. These are all very useful for getting into those little tricky spots that sometimes you just can't get to with a screwdriver. I find myself using these when I have to do holes on 3D prints. Sometimes I just like to dig in there and make sure that those are cleared. I also do a lot of overhangs for holders for screws, and these are very helpful for getting into those overhangs. It doesn't actually have to be this brand. I find myself using this one a lot, the L hook, but if you can find one that offers you a myriad of these, then I would suggest you go out and pick one up for that 3D printing enthusiast. All right, now number three is an item that I have already reviewed, and that's this guy right here. Now excuse the very interesting setup that I have here. Let me just take that off real quick. But this is the Costco Fanttik blower and vacuum accessory. I highly recommend this item for two reasons. Number one, you can use it to clean up the 3D printer. When you print things, there are a couple of items that get left behind, and getting a big shop vac to clean that out can be a pain in the butt. This makes it very easy. I have used this almost every single day to clean up the printers, and it works flawlessly. I've also used it to clean up my car, the floor. I just broom up the dust and use this to clean it up. Now, the other attachment is for blowing capabilities, and you can use this to clear out all of the excess material on a bed. Once in a while, specifically on these bamboo printers, there are a couple of poops that get stuck on the bed. I just use the blower attachments to blow those away, and then once the print is done, I come in and clean it up with the vacuum attachment. I would highly recommend this. If you were to ask me personally, this is the one that I have used pretty significantly, and it's super light. It is rechargeable. Anyone can use it. So that would be one thing that I would highly recommend for your 3D printing enthusiast. All right, now number four is specific to bamboo printers, and that is one of these guys here. This is a 3D printing plate by BQ, I think is how you pronounce it. I don't really know too well how to pronounce it, but we use this to stop using the glue sticks on the normal bed. I have found that particularly on the P1S, it worked very well. The H2D is very dependent. For example, if I'm building things for my engineering company, this seems to work great. For the stuff that my partner prints, it doesn't really seem to help much. As a matter of fact, it sometimes makes it a little bit worse. But for my application, it does work very well. I run this plate exclusively, not this particular one, but the one in the P1S is in there all the time. I have never switched it out. I've never had to use glue sticks. I print ABS, TPU, PLA, PETGCF, carbon fiber nylon, and the plates just work. Now, the one that I have in there is the rough plate. This one is the smooth plate for the H2D. So if you have a bamboo printer, it's no lie and it's no joke, these actually are very helpful. So that's just one other thing I would recommend you buy. Now, this one unfortunately though is a little pricey, so I would shop around, see if you can get a deal on this. And ultimately, if you are printing things like engineering items, then this might actually be worth it. But if you're okay using the glue stick occasionally, occasionally, then you might want to skip this for now. But if you have the bucks, I would recommend that you go out and purchase one of these. And finally, we have these guys right here. These are calipers. Now, you gotta be careful because calipers are more of an engineering item, if you want to call them that. So they get the engineering tax, which means if you go online, you're gonna find some from Mitutoyo, and those can run in the $200-300 range. Some psychopaths out there can charge $500 to $1,000 for these. But if you go to, say, Lowe's or Home Depot, you can find a cheap pair of these, you know, and they work. For what we do around here for reverse engineering threads or just measuring things here and there, these are absolutely great. Once in a while, a part breaks. For example, I recently had a part break on my toilet, the handle for it. I just use these to reverse engineer it, get some rough numbers, and make up a prototype, and it's still working to this day. These are very useful for getting things like diameters, width, length, all of that. So here are just some general tips on how to use these if you don't know how to use them and you're wondering if they'll be good for the 3D printing enthusiast. For example, you can use these to measure diameters like so. You can also use these to measure the interior diameter of an item, as you can see right here. That's what these little guys are for. You can also use these to measure depth, as you can see right here. I can measure how deep this thing is. Very rough number. And of course, you can come up with some mathematical formulas to determine the thickness of, say, a pipe, the outer wall thickness, and so on and so forth. And I've even seen people use these to measure them. For example, let's say at 4 or 5 millimeters, and then lock this down and then just use this to scribe the entire piece. I don't know if I would recommend that. I don't think that's what these things were built for. But nonetheless, I would suggest you go out and get them one of these. I think these were about $30 to $40 if I recall at Home Depot, and I have used them pretty extensively. Which kind of leads me to the sub item in this list, and that of course is the measuring tape. Measuring tape is very versatile. You can use it to check certain things. Are you going to fit within the volume of your 3D printer? This would be absolutely perfect for that. It doesn't have to be anything like this. You can get one at Home Depot for about $5, and those seem to work just fine. Now, it goes without saying that depending on the printer that the individual has, it wouldn't be a bad idea to get them some extra nozzles, maybe some socks, and no, not those socks. I'm talking about the socks that go on the nozzles themselves, and perhaps some extra filament. But of course, that would depend on what they do. These items that I have laid out for you, though, are items that we use pretty much every single day, and we have found them extremely useful. It goes without saying that most of the gifts that I have laid out so far are geared more towards the casual 3D printer. But if you are into the engineering side of things, or if the person that you want to give to is more geared towards engineering, then these gifts might be a little bit more useful. Now, the first thing that I'm going to recommend for that individual is one of these. This is a soldering iron. This particular item is mainly geared for wires. We use this to solder two wires together, but it actually has a special purpose in the 3D printing world. Let me show you. We use the soldering iron to put these into 3D printed bodies. These are heat threaded nuts. Now, you use the soldering iron to heat up the metal here, and this is then inserted into the 3D body, giving the body a threadable surface. You don't have to tap the 3D printed plastic, you just use one of these. And it has been proven that these are substantially stronger. If you need something to give to that engineering 3D printing individual, a soldering iron might not be a bad idea. Now, the other item that I recommend is one of these. This is a heat gun. Now, you can use a heat gun to take prints off of the bed, and you can also use it to remove stress marks off of 3D printed surfaces. I have printed a couple of things here and there, and some of them have experienced some pretty significant stress marks. But by using the heat gun, you can use it to remove those stress marks, and in some cases, give the surface better visual aesthetics. Now, this next one is gonna break the bank a little bit, but if you have the room and if you have the box, I would recommend one of those right there. That is a toolbox. It's actually on casters. I got it from Harbor Freight and it ran me about $300. It is very useful for storing items like 3D printing nozzles, filament, screw heads, bits, and so on and so forth. I would recommend purchasing one of these. You don't have to get anything this big, and I realize that not everyone is going to have the space, but if you do have it and if you have the bucks, then it wouldn't be a bad idea to get one for the 3D printer. Now I just want to remind you that all of the items that I listed here are also not sponsored. They're all straight from our collection. We pay for these just like everyone else. Now, I just want to point out that this year has been pretty extravagant. I started off, I think, at about 300 to 400 subscribers, and now I am at about 1,200 subscribers. It's a pretty astonishing growth, so I want to thank each and every one of you, and I hope you have a great holiday. Thank you guys so much for watching, and take care. Bye-bye.